Ladies and gentlemen, we often think silence is harmless, that by saying nothing, we're keeping the peace, that avoiding the hard conversation makes us kind, that by staying quiet, we're not doing damage. But what if I told you your silence isn't neutral? It's not soft. It's not safe. Your silence is killing them. Not always in the literal sense, but slowly, silently, deeply, and sometimes permanently. Let me show you how. Let me give you 6 ways our silence is doing more harm than we realize. There's a moment that happens before every injustice takes root. A pause, a silence, a looking away. And in that pause, something deadly begins to grow. Because silence isn't neutral. Silence is an endorsement when it stands in the presence of harm. When someone tells a sexist joke at work and we laugh nervously or say nothing, we think we've stayed out of it. We tell ourselves we didn't contribute. But to the person who hears that joke and feels a deep sting of being devalued, our silence doesn't feel neutral, it feels like betrayal. It feels like agreement. Silence sends a message, not to the one who told the joke, but to the one who was hurt by it, that their pain isn't worth disrupting the comfort of the room, that their dignity isn't worth the discomfort of speaking up. We become complicit without intending to, and that complicity, it stacks. Over time, it becomes culture. When a quieter classmate is mocked and we just keep walking, we reinforce a belief in the bully that this behavior is allowed, that cruelty is normal, and we plant a belief in the one being bullied that no one will come, that they're on their own. What does that do to a person? What does it teach them about their worth, about their safety in the world? Or when a friend finally opens up about emotional abuse, maybe trembling as they speak, maybe unsure whether their pain even counts as real, and we change the subject, make a joke, or say, let's not get into that. What we mean is, this is too heavy. But what they hear is, your story is too inconvenient. And that moment might be the one shot they had at reaching out. It might have taken all the strength they had left, and we shut the door. It's not because we're bad people. We don't stay silent because we approve of injustice. We stay silent because it's hard, because it's awkward, because we don't know what to say, because we're afraid of losing approval, looking foolish, being the only one. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action despite it. And when we choose comfort over conscience, we aren't just avoiding conflict, we're validating it. History proves this with chilling clarity. Think of the civil rights movement, not just the violence and hatred, but the masses who stood on the sidelines. People who claimed to disagree with racism but still said, now's not the time, let's not make waves, it's not my fight. Their silence gave racism room to breathe. And when hate has room to breathe, it multiplies. The Holocaust didn't begin with gas chambers, it began with silence. With neighbors who didn't speak up when Jewish families were taken from their homes, with people who looked the other way when the first laws were passed, with leaders who decided it was too politically risky to intervene. Millions died not only because evil existed, but because good people chose not to confront it. And genocide, whether in Rwanda, Bosnia, or Darfur, always starts with silence. Dehumanization, once left unchallenged, becomes policy, then becomes action. Then, because everyone agreed, but because not enough spoke out. There was a Holocaust survivor who once said, the world didn't look away because they didn't care. They looked away because it was easier. And that's the truth. Speaking up is hard. It always has been. But easy doesn't make history. Easy doesn't protect the vulnerable. Easy doesn't change the world. Speaking up does. Every time we speak, we create a ripple. That ripple tells someone in pain that they're not alone. That ripple tells someone causing harm that they've been seen. And that ripple invites others to be brave too. The first voice is the hardest. The second is easier. The third becomes a movement. Think about the people in your life who spoke up when it was hard. Maybe a teacher who defended you from a bully. Maybe a friend who called out disrespect in a group chat, maybe a stranger who stood up on your behalf. You remember them not because they were loud, but because they were brave. You remember them because in a world of silence, they chose to be a sound. You don't have to be an expert to speak up. You don't need the perfect words. Sometimes all it takes is saying, That's not okay. Hey, leave them alone. I don't find that funny. Or even just checking in with the person who was hurt, letting them know they were seen, that you were on their side, even if your voice shook. It's not about being a hero, it's about being human, about recognizing that your silence has weight, that your absence can echo louder than your words, and that your decision to speak, however small, might be the difference between someone giving up or holding on. You never know who's watching. A younger sibling, a colleague, a stranger in a room. When you speak up, you give them permission to do the same. When you stay silent, you teach them to shrink, to accept, to survive instead of thrive. The truth is, we don't get to decide how our silence is interpreted. Only the person on the receiving end does. And often to them, it feels like abandonment. It feels like being erased in real time. The good news is that silence isn't final. Every moment gives us a new chance, a new opportunity to choose courage over comfort, to make noise where there's been too much quiet, to be the person we needed when we were hurting. We all know what silence feels like when we're on the receiving end of it. When you're in pain and no one says a word, it can be more crushing than the original wound. So why would we ever want to be that for someone else? This is not about guilt, it's about responsibility, about owning the power we have, not just to avoid harm, but to prevent it, to dismantle it, to build a world where silence isn't the norm when someone is being torn down, a world where people feel safe to be seen, to speak, to exist without fear of being ignored. Your voice might tremble, that's okay. Your knees might shake, that's okay. What matters is that you use them. Because if silence validates injustice, then speech is what disrupts it. And the more we disrupt, the harder it becomes for cruelty to survive. Don't underestimate what your voice can do. It doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be heard. Silence is subtle. It's not loud or explosive. It doesn't crash into a room or set off alarms. It simply lingers, quiet, unassuming. But don't mistake its stillness for innocence. Because silence, especially in the moments when people need us most, can be devastating. Think about a friend who finally gathers the courage to share that they've been battling depression. That moment didn't come easily. It came after nights staring at the ceiling, questioning their worth. It came after rehearsing the words in their mind over and over again. And when they finally speak, when they finally reach out, what do? We nod. We offer a soft smile. And then we change the subject. Maybe not because we don't care, but because we don't know what to say. Because it's uncomfortable. Because we're scared of getting it wrong. But in doing so, we leave them alone in their pain. And the message we send, whether we mean to or not, is loud and clear. You're on your own. It's not just our friends. It's the employee who lingers at your office door, eyes tired, voice unsure, saying, it's just been a lot lately. That's not small talk. That's a plea. That's someone asking for permission to be human. And when we brush past it, when we don't lean in, don't say, do you want to talk about it? We rob them of the very thing they were hoping to find, support. Or the child who says, I don't feel safe. Those 5 words are everything. They're not an overreaction. They're not drama. They are a signal. But if we respond with, don't be silly, or there's nothing to worry about, we teach them not to trust their own instincts. We teach them that their feelings don't matter. And worst of all, we teach them not to come to us next time. We tell ourselves we're protecting them from discomfort, from hard conversations, from spiraling. But maybe we're protecting ourselves from the vulnerability it takes to sit in someone else's pain. Because showing up fully, that's not easy. It takes courage to not have the answers. It takes heart to hold space for someone without trying to fix them. But that's exactly what people need. No one is expecting us to be superheroes. No one is asking us to solve depression or erase overwhelm or remove every fear from a child's world. They're asking us to stand beside them, to be a witness to their struggle, to look them in the eye and say you're not alone. Because trust isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in the quiet moments when someone feels seen, when they feel heard, when they feel believed. Trust lives in the small invitations. Tell me more. It lives in the awkward, beautiful honesty of, I don't know what to say, but I'm here. It grows in the moments when we let down our own walls and say, I've been there too. That's how we connect, not by perfect words, but by real presence. By being willing to sit in the messiness of someone else's story and say, you matter. When we choose silence in those moments, we don't just miss a chance to connect, we erode trust, slowly, quietly, fatally. Because people remember. They remember who looked away, who avoided eye contact, who changed the subject. And eventually they stop trying. They stop reaching out. They stop sharing the vulnerable parts of themselves. Not because the pain is gone, but because they no longer believe it's safe to share it. And that's how we lose people. Not all at once, but piece by piece. We lose the friend who no longer picks up the phone. The employee who stops offering ideas, the child who stops telling us what's wrong, not because they don't care, but because they stop believing we did. If we want to be leaders of families, of teams, of communities, we must start by listening. Really listening with our whole selves, with open hearts and quiet mouths. Because presence speaks louder than solutions. Compassion carries more weight than advice. And silence, when chosen in the wrong moment, doesn't feel like peace. It feels like abandonment. This isn't a call to have all the answers. It's a call to stop running from the questions. To be brave enough to stay in the conversation. To say, that sounds really hard. I'm here with you. To make it safe for people to show up as they are. Messy, scared, uncertain, and still be met with love. We all want to be trusted. We all want others to know they can count on us. But trust doesn't come from our words. It comes from our actions in the hard moments. From the time we paused a meeting to check in on someone. From the text that said, thinking of you. From the time we said, tell me more, even when we didn't know how the conversation would go. Those moments matter. They compound. They build. Trust like bricks in a foundation. And it's never too late to start. It's never too late to say, I missed something before, but I'm here now. It's never too late to repair what silence has broken. Because people don't expect perfection. They expect presence. They matter enough for us to stay, to show up, to care. Silence may feel safe. It may feel polite. But in the moments that count, it's the most dangerous thing we can offer. Because silence, when someone is hurting, doesn't feel neutral. It feels like betrayal. So let's not be silent. Let's be present. Let's be real. Let's be the kind of people who don't run from the hard moments, but step into them with open hearts and the courage to care. Because in the end, we won't be remembered for how perfectly we responded. We'll be remembered for whether we stayed, whether we listened, whether we made someone feel a little less alone in the dark. Silence is often mistaken for peace, but in truth, silence can be the most deafening form of betrayal. Especially when someone is hurting and everyone around them is pretending not to hear. Silence shields abusers, not because we agree with them, not because we approve, but because we're afraid of confrontation, afraid of consequences, afraid of disrupting the illusion of calm. Predators don't thrive on power, they thrive on silence. They don't count on their strength, they count on our hesitation. They depend on that nervous chuckle when someone makes a joke that's not funny. They depend on the awkward glances we exchange, the subject changes, the way we look at the floor instead of at the victim. They depend on our passivity, on our belief that if it's not happening to us, it's not our problem, but it is our problem. Every time someone is harmed in our presence and we choose to stay quiet, we become part of the harm. We live in a world that loves comfort, but justice has never been comfortable. When someone says he's always been like that, what they're really saying is, I've accepted it. And I expect you to accept it too. When they whisper, don't make a big deal, they're not trying to protect you. They're trying to protect the image of safety, the illusion of harmony, the fragile mask of everything is fine. And when someone sighs, I don't want to get involved, what they're really saying is, your safety isn't worth my inconvenience. And in those moments when people shrug or smile politely or look the other way, the abuser hears a green light. A silent permission, a clear message, keep going. No one will stop you. And the person being hurt hears something even worse. You don't matter enough to protect. That is the message that echoes in their minds long after the abuse. It shapes how they see the world, how they see themselves, and far too often they internalize the silence more deeply than they ever absorbed the violence. Because wounds can heal, but being ignored when you're in pain, that kind of abandonment is a scar that never really fades. There's a study by the US Department of Justice that reveals something heartbreaking. Over 60% of sexual assault victims never report what happened to them. Not because it wasn't real, not because they weren't traumatized, but because they knew deep in their gut that no one would believe them. Or worse, they feared that people would believe them and still do nothing. Still go to dinner with the abuser, still invite them to the party, still promote them, still laugh at their jokes, still say that's just how he is. And here's the hard truth. Too often, those fears are justified. Let's not pretend this only happens in distant corners of the world or in the headlines of the news. It happens in classrooms, in churches, in offices, in homes. It happens when a coach touches a student inappropriately and the staff doesn't want to risk the reputation of the school. It happens when a boss makes suggestive remarks and HR suggests letting it slide. It happens when a family member crosses a line and someone says, let's not cause drama. And it happens when we know better, but we choose silence over courage. Silence doesn't keep the peace, it protects the problem. And problems that are protected don't go away. They grow, they adapt, they evolve, and eventually they infect the culture around them. One unchecked predator in a workplace can demoralize an entire team. One ignored cry for help in a school can destroy a student's sense of safety forever. One "it's none of my business" can become a license for a predator to harm again and again and again. But here's the good news. Silence is a choice, which means speaking up is also a choice. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is what happens when we decide that someone else's safety is more important than our own discomfort. When we speak up, not because it's easy, but because we know that staying quiet is complicity. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes it's a firm, calm, that's not okay. Sometimes it's taking someone aside to say, I saw what happened, you're not crazy, and you're not alone. Sometimes it's reporting what you know, even when your voice shakes. Sometimes it's choosing not to laugh, not to clap, not to pretend you didn't see. There's power in a single voice, one voice saying, I believe you, one voice saying, that wasn't right, one voice saying enough. And when one voice speaks, others find their courage. Because silence may be contagious, but so is bravery. We've all been in that moment where something happens that feels wrong and we freeze. We feel the heat in our face, the pounding in our chest. We think, should I say something? And in that split second, we tell ourselves a lie. It's not my place, but it is your place because you were there, because you witnessed it, because you are a human being standing next to another human being in pain. That makes it your place. That makes it your moment. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be heroes. We just have to be willing. Willing to risk being uncomfortable. Willing to stand up even when we stand alone. Because the cost of silence is always paid by someone else. And sometimes the person paying the price is someone who looks up to you. Someone who trusts you. Someone who needed you to say something, anything, to remind them that they weren't invisible, that their pain mattered. That they mattered. The world doesn't need more bystanders, it needs more upstanders. More people who understand that every time they speak up, they are building a culture where harm is not tolerated and victims are not abandoned. A culture where truth is louder than fear, where empathy trumps image, where no one has to wonder if their pain is too inconvenient to be acknowledged. The next time you hear something off, see something wrong, feel that knot in your stomach that tells you this isn't okay, remember, silence is a message. And you get to choose what that message says. Let it say, I see you. Let it say, this ends here. Let it say, you are not alone. Silence doesn't just fill the room, it shapes it. In companies and classrooms and families, silence isn't neutral, it's a message. It tells people what matters and what doesn't. It tells people what's safe to say and what must be buried. And slowly, without a memo or a meeting, silence becomes the loudest voice in the room. It begins to speak on behalf of everyone. It speaks for leaders who don't confront harmful behavior. It speaks for parents who choose peace over truth. It speaks for teachers who think ignoring something will make it disappear. But silence doesn't resolve problems, it deepens them. Culture, we like to think, is created in mission statements, in motivational posters, in town halls filled with buzzwords and hashtags. But real culture is forged in quiet moments, not loud declarations. It's revealed not when things are easy, but when they're hard. When someone crosses the line, how we respond then, that's what shapes culture. When a manager sees harassment and looks the other way, that's culture. When a friend makes a cruel joke and no one challenges it, that's culture. When a child expresses fear and a parent dismisses it with, "You're being dramatic," that too is culture. And the truth is, people watch everything, not the policies, not the plaques on the wall. They watch what happens when someone breaks the unspoken rules. They pay attention to who is protected and who is punished. They notice who gets away with what. They absorb the unspoken code. And what we even passively becomes the standard. That's how cultures drift. That's how dysfunction takes root. Not through one major betrayal, but 100 silent ones. 100 times someone saw something wrong and stayed quiet. 100 chances to protect a principle that slipped through the cracks because no one wanted to rock the boat. It's not that we want toxic cultures. It's just that we often don't realize how fragile healthy culture is. It doesn't maintain itself. It requires constant protection. It requires someone somewhere to say the hard thing at the hard time. That's not okay here. That phrase has the power to halt a harmful pattern in its tracks. It draws a line, it sets a tone. And the irony is, we think those moments will be massive and obvious, but most aren't. Most are subtle, a passing comment, a disrespectful glance, a moment of exclusion, and they pass by unless someone stops them. But speaking up is hard, especially when the person causing harm is someone we care about or someone we fear. The top performer who brings in millions but treats others like dirt. The family member who is beloved and also abusive. The popular teacher whose methods cross lines. There's a temptation to justify it, to say, well, they don't mean it, or that's just how they are. But the moment we excuse one wrong to preserve comfort or convenience, we plant a seed. And over time, that seed grows into a culture where people stop trusting that truth will win. They stop believing that respect matters more than results. And they start adapting to survive the silence instead of contributing their best. This isn't about being perfect, it's about being intentional. It's about being the kind of leader, teacher, parent, friend who doesn't confuse politeness with principle, who doesn't let fear of discomfort outweigh the responsibility to protect what's right. Because here's the thing, every culture has a moment where someone must go first, where someone must be brave enough to say, I don't agree with that, or that's not funny, or we don't do that here. And it's never easy, but every time someone speaks up, they give permission for others to follow. They make space for accountability. They tell the group we are better than this. The stories of strong cultures don't begin with perfect leadership. They begin with a moment, often a quiet one, where someone chose to say what no one else would. A receptionist who reported misconduct, a student who defended a peer, a junior employee who challenged a manager. And they risked something, reputation, comfort, approval, but they gained something bigger, integrity, influence, real leadership. The question isn't whether your culture has silence. Every culture does. The question is, where is it? What aren't people saying out loud? What are they afraid to name? What's happening in whispers that no one is willing to put on record? That's where the culture is being formed, not in the glossy presentations or the annual retreats. It's being formed in the spaces where truth is inconvenient. And if we're not actively working to bring light to those spaces, we're letting darkness define them. Sometimes people say, but what if I say something and it causes conflict? And that's the wrong question. The right question is, what happens if I don't? Because the cost of silence isn't measured in comfort today. It's measured in broken trust tomorrow, in disengaged employees, in anxious kids, in wounded communities. Silence doesn't just avoid conflict, it defers it. It builds a pressure that eventually erupts. It breaks things in ways that are harder to fix later. If you want a healthy culture, you have to fight for it. Not once, but every day. You have to create safety, not just for people to perform, but for them to speak, to disagree, to challenge, to report, to be heard. And that starts with your own voice. It starts with asking yourself, where have I been quiet when I should have spoken? And deciding that next time you won't be. Because culture is not just what we celebrate, it's what we tolerate. And when we tolerate silence in the face of harm, we build a culture that looks nice on the surface but is hollow underneath. A culture that can't withstand challenge, that doesn't earn trust, that confuses image with impact. But when we choose to speak, even when it's unpopular, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's someone we admire, we build something stronger, a culture of courage, of clarity, of real values that live not on walls, but in our words and our actions. And that's the kind of culture worth protecting, one honest voice at a time. So there's something quietly dangerous about the moments we say nothing. It seems harmless at first. We think we're keeping the peace. We convince ourselves it's not our place, not our problem, not the right time. So we bite our tongues. We look down. We shift in our chairs, pretending we didn't hear the remark, see the mistreatment, feel the tension in the room. But here's the truth. Every time we choose silence, we're not just silencing ourselves, but training others to stay quiet too. People learn far more from what we tolerate than from what we preach. They watch how we respond in uncomfortable moments. They notice when we let a cruel joke slide or fail to question unfairness. They observe how we recoil from conflict, how we avoid difficult conversations, how we allow what should be challenged. And in that watching, something starts to shift in them. They stop believing it's safe to speak. They start thinking their voice doesn't matter. They wonder if truth is worth the cost, so they shrink too. One person's silence can become a lesson to another. This is how we survive here, by staying quiet. And when enough people adopt that mindset, a culture of silence is born. It looks calm on the outside, but underneath it's a storm. It's unspoken pain, suppressed truth, growing resentment. It's injustice with no challenger. It's harm without accountability. And worst of all, it's a place where people begin to question if their voice was ever welcome to begin with. I've seen it happen in companies. A junior employee watches their manager ignore microaggressions or unethical behavior. That employee learns the rules of the unspoken game. Don't stir the pot. Don't be difficult. Don't risk your job for your values. I've seen it in schools. A student is bullied, and the adults avoid eye contact, hoping it resolves itself. The classmates notice, and now they know silence is safer than standing up. I've seen it in families, where tough topics are tiptoed around for generations. Children internalize the message, certain things just aren't talked about, no matter how much they hurt. We think we're protecting ourselves, but in truth, we're passing down a legacy of silence that will outlive the moment. Every time we stay quiet, we're not just choosing our own comfort. We're shaping the behavior of everyone watching. We're teaching them how to respond when it's their turn. So when they're faced with something wrong, they'll remember how we averted our eyes. And they'll do the same. Silence trains silence. But here's the good news. The opposite is true too. Just like silence is contagious, so is courage. One act of bravery can ripple through a room, a building, a movement. One voice can unlock hundreds more. We've seen it, we've lived it. Think about the Me Too movement. It didn't begin with a crowd. It began with one person deciding not to stay quiet anymore. One person brave enough to say, "This happened to me." That one voice shattered the illusion of isolation. Suddenly, others realized they weren't alone. They saw that silence wasn't their only option, so they spoke. And then more did. And before long, the silence was broken by a tidal wave of truth. It's not that people were finally strong enough to speak, it's that someone else's courage made them believe they could. That's the power of one voice. That's the power you hold. When you speak up, when you call out injustice, when you question what feels wrong, when you tell your story, you give others permission to do the same. You create a culture where truth is honored, not hidden, where people feel safe being real, where silence isn't the default response to discomfort. And no, it's not always easy. Speaking up feels vulnerable. It can be risky. It invites attention, challenge, and sometimes backlash. But so does silence, because while silence may seem safe, it often comes at the cost of integrity, authenticity, and impact. It may keep you in the room, but it doesn't make the room better. It may win you approval, but it loses you a piece of yourself. You don't need to have the perfect words. You don't need a microphone or a stage. You just need the courage to say, that's not okay, or I disagree, or this matters. Because when someone else hears you, it stirs something in them. It reminds them of their own voice. It shows them a way forward. You become the reason they believe they're not crazy, not alone, not powerless. We often underestimate the influence of our choices, but every time we act with courage, we rewrite the script for everyone watching. We prove that honesty is possible, that change is possible, that kindness can be loud. We plant seeds of bravery that grow in ways we'll never fully see. Think of the people who changed your life, those who stood up when others sat down, who told the truth when it was easier to lie, who defended you when no one else did. Chances are, they didn't even realize the impact they had, but you remember, because courage leaves a mark. It makes things better. It makes things possible. Now imagine being that person for someone else. Imagine what shifts when you're the one who doesn't let things slide. Imagine the chain reaction when your voice makes someone else find theirs. That's how movements begin. That's how cultures change. That's how silence is broken. Every time you choose to speak, to stand, to challenge, to name what others fear, something important happens. Not just in the moment, but in the future, it shapes. You may never know who's watching, but someone always is, and they're learning from you. So ask yourself, what legacy are you leaving with your silence? What might begin with your voice? Because in a world full of whispers, your courage can be the loudest thing in the room. There's someone in your life right now, someone close, someone dear, who's quietly unraveling. Not with a scream, not with a dramatic cry for help, but in small, silent ways. They've stopped laughing the way they used to. They avoid eye contact. Their messages are shorter. The energy they once carried into a room now lingers like a shadow of what it used to be. You've noticed. Maybe not fully, maybe just in passing, a feeling in your gut, a sense that something is off. But you said nothing, not because you didn't care, but because you didn't know what to say. Because you didn't want to make it worse. Because you assumed if they need me, they'll reach out. That belief is more dangerous than we realize, because the ones who are hurting the most often don't reach out. Not because they don't want help, but because they're convinced they don't deserve it. Because shame and isolation have built walls too high to climb on their own. They're not waiting for answers, they're waiting for presence, for someone brave enough to step into the silence. To break it, to offer one simple gesture that says, you're not alone. What we tell ourselves is that silence protects. That by not bringing something up, we're keeping things calm, we're being respectful, we're waiting for the right time, but silence doesn't keep peace. It only pretends to. And beneath it, pain festers, hurt multiplies. The longer we stay silent, the heavier the burden becomes for the person carrying it. And what started as a whisper of pain becomes a deafening inner scream that no one else can hear. Mental health professionals have long warned us. The opposite of connection is not disagreement. It's indifference. It's absence. It's when people start believing no one cares enough to notice. One of the strongest predictors of suicide isn't a diagnosis or a genetic history. It's disconnection. It's the absence of community, of real conversation, of being truly seen. Which means the antidote isn't perfection, it's proximity. It's not having all the right words, it's simply showing up. Think back to a moment when you were struggling, truly struggling, and someone noticed. Maybe they didn't fix anything, maybe they didn't say anything profound, but they looked you in the eye and asked, how are you really doing? And for a moment, you didn't feel like a burden, you didn't feel invisible, you felt human. That moment probably didn't come from a therapist's office or a hospital room. It came from a hallway, a living room, a late night call, a passing conversation that turned into a lifeline. We are desperate for those lifelines, not just in the grand tragic moments, but in everyday life, in the friend who stopped showing up, in the coworker whose humor has faded, in the sibling who never calls back. We feel the shift, but we tell ourselves it's none of our business, or that they'll talk when they're ready, or that we're imagining it. But somewhere on the other side of that story is a person hoping, pleading that someone will notice, that someone will care enough to risk the awkwardness. Here's the truth. The discomfort of speaking up is nothing compared to the devastation of staying silent. We think silence is neutral, but it's not. Silence says something. It says, I don't see you. It says, I don't care enough to ask. It says, your pain isn't my responsibility. And to the person on the other side, that silence can feel like rejection, like abandonment, like confirmation that they are alone. It's easy to believe that love is shown through big gestures, gifts, celebrations, loud declarations. But love is also quiet. It's in the small act of checking in, of asking twice when someone says, I'm fine, of not moving on until you're sure they're okay, of sitting in silence with someone when they don't have the words, because presence is louder than perfection. And in a world where so many are screaming silently, our presence becomes a form of rescue. You don't need to be a therapist. You don't need a script. You don't need to fix anything. You just need to be willing to ask, to be willing to step toward discomfort rather than away from it, to trade avoidance for empathy, to say, I've noticed you're not yourself lately. I don't want to assume, but I want you to know I'm here, no pressure, no expectations, just here. Those words might seem small, but to someone who feels unseen, they are everything. They are proof that someone cares, that someone is paying attention, that someone is willing to stand beside them in their mess. And often, that one gesture can be the spark that reignites hope. That one sentence can become the thread that keeps someone tethered to this world. And when you're the one hurting, because eventually we all are, don't wait for someone to guess. Don't hide your pain beneath a smile. You're not weak for needing help. You're human, and humans were never meant to heal alone. Your vulnerability might feel risky, but it's also contagious. When you speak up, you give others permission to do the same. Every culture, every workplace, every family needs more brave voices, more people willing to step into the silence, to lean in when it's easier to walk away, to replace judgment with curiosity, fear with love, silence with truth. Because silence is never just silence. It's a story being written in someone else's life. The story of someone who almost gave up but didn't, because someone chose to speak. The story of someone who felt invisible but was reminded they mattered. The story of someone who found the courage to open up, because you did first. We don't change the world by shouting louder. We change it by listening closer, by noticing, by caring enough to ask. Because behind every smile you pass, every I'm fine you hear, is a world you can't see. And maybe, just maybe, your words are the first breath someone else has taken in weeks. So speak, even if your voice shakes. Ask, even if you're not sure what to say. Lean in, even when you want to run. Because your silence might feel like safety, but it might also be killing them. Let's make a decision today to speak with courage, to act with compassion, to break the silence. Not to shout, not to blame, but to show up. For those we love, for those who are struggling, and for a world that desperately needs more voices willing to say, this isn't okay and I care enough to say it.